Okay, this week what we're really talking about is religion, and this is the first of those talks, and we'll be looking at today in this lecture from the Vedic age to the development of Hinduism as a full-fledged religion. And then, of course, the other lectures are going to talk about Buddhism and Judaism. So let's begin here with the Vedic age. When we talk about the Vedic age, between about 1500 to 500 BCE, we're talking about a period of time in what is going to become later India, in the Indus Valley. And in that region, that's the same area where they had previously had those very developed cities, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, but those cities had gone into decline. And into this region, into this Indus Valley region, you have a series of invaders, nomads, migrating into it. It's how forceful it was is under dispute, moving in from the Caucasus Mountains, and then heading down into this region that formerly had been occupied by the Harappans. As they move in, they end up taking over and establishing basically a social hierarchy that focuses on them and providing their status. So the areas are herders, they're tribal in format, they're not urban, they're not, quote, civilized, they're not particularly farmers, and they are lighter skinned. The people they meet when they move into the area, they meet the Dasas, the locals, the descendants of the Harappans, who are darker skinned, who are farmers, who aren't nomads like they are. And it's speculated that possibly in this early area, women had more opportunities than they would later on, but that's really a matter of speculation. The system that emerges out of this is the system of what is called Varna. And one of the mythologies that is told during the Vedic age to account for this is the concept that out of the great god Brahma, they make these different parts of the being. And so each of these groups of men comes from that separate part of the divine, therefore they have the special gifts of that special part. So as the poet says, teaching, studying, performing sacrificial rites, so too making others perform sacrificial rites, in giving away and receiving gifts. These he, the Creator, assigned to the Brahmins. And the Brahmin are the priests, the scholars. Protection of the people, giving away of wealth, performance, or sacrificial rites, study and non-attachment to sensual pleasures. These are, in short, the rites of the Kashitra, the warrior group. So you've got the Brahmins, you've got the warriors. Third, you've got tending of cattle, giving away of wealth, performance of sacrificial rites, study, trade, and commerce, usury and agriculture. Usury, in this case, meaning loaning money. These are the traits of the Vaishya, the merchants. And then in this initial system of Varna, there's then a fourth group, the Shudra, the peasants, the laborers, who are responsible for service without malice, even of these other three classes. Later on, there develops a fifth group, who are sometimes called the untouchables by Westerners. Now the correct term would be the scheduled castes. Those were the people who are seen at the very, very bottom of society, doing the jobs that are unfit even for a Shudra to do, involving dealing with human waste, dead bodies, things like that, things that make you ritually impure. Quite possibly, where that group, that bottom group, comes from is they may have been tribal peoples who were conquered and sort of brought into the domain of India. Of these, there's a very definite hierarchy, as they explain here in the poem. Of created beings, those which are animate are the best. Of the animate, those who subsist by means of their intellect are best. Of the intelligent, men are the best. And of men, the Brahmins are declared to be the very best. So basically, the more you live by your mind and you work by your mind like the Brahmins do, the better you are. And of course, this is a set of poetry, a set of words that are recalled and kept for the people by the Brahmins. There may be some bias there. But there's definitely this sense that the mental is above all things, and the Shudra is sort of lower down because what they basically are is they're supposed to be bodies who perform the work as directed by the Brahmins and the other castes above them. Within Varna, then, there's other subdivisions. And the system does and does not continue to exist today. It's not supposed to be all-controlling. Okay, and in fact, it's illegal to discriminate in India based on your caste. But it does remain still as a mark of identity and a sense of who you are. So if you were to speak to somebody from India, quite possibly, and sort of ask who they were or what their background is, they quite possibly might identify themselves, of course, as being Indian, but more than that, possibly with their local language, but also their caste group might come in there as well. And so it hasn't disappeared, but it's no longer considered to be a legal status or something that it's basis to be discriminated against based on. Within the Varna, there are the jati, the subgroups. So if all of the merchants is one caste, one large group, within that there's many different jati, which are that's everything from the hat makers to the grocers, to all the various different groups that break down within it. And those are those occupational subgroups, which are often we refer to as castes by outsiders of India. In this early Vedic era, that period, that 1,000 years between 1500 and 500 BCE, is the Vedic religion. And that's a very uncomplicated version compared to what's going to come later. What's at the center of this concept of the Vedic religion is the crucial importance of sacrifice. That's the key ritual, because that's how the gods are communicated with. And it's the same concept that we've seen again and again before, which is this idea that the physical forces of the universe are identified with the various divine forces, the gods out there. And so the way to communicate with those gods, to appease them, to get them to help the community rather than to hurt it, is through offering sacrifices to the gods. And the only ones who are allowed to offer those sacrifices, to perform those sacrifices in the Vedic system, are the Brahmins themselves. So they may not be the kings, but they do have spiritual knowledge. And it's possible that writing is not adopted till a later period in India, and it's possible that in fact maybe they encouraged to keep away from writing as a way of keeping the sacred knowledge to themselves. So they're not the kings, the Brahmins. However, the Brahmins are critical for performing the sacrifices that are going to allow humans to get by and communicate with the gods. Brahmin power, therefore, like I said, belongs in, first of all, the sacrifices, the performance of the sacrifices, but also in knowing the Vedas, the sacred texts. And this is what this period is called for, the Vedic age. It's called for the Vedas, the stories of the people, that is also supposed to communicate the proper behavior, the proper beliefs about the world. In this really early period, of course, they're not written down. They're known orally, and that's a key part of the Brahmin position or job, is memorizing the words of the Vedas so they can be passed down over the generations. As part of this set of beliefs is a central belief in reincarnation, and versions of this are very common in Indian religions. We'll be talking about it as well with Buddhism later on. And reincarnation in this sense, and it plays out differently in different versions, but for the Vedic religion, at the heart of it is this concept of the Atman. And the Atman is the individual's undying spirit. Literally it translates as the breath. That's the force of life that lives within that physical being. And each individual has an Atman. Each being has an Atman. That Atman is what passes on after death. So when you die, that spirit, that soul, that breath within you is what's going to be passed on to the next life, even as the physical body declines and goes away. Karma is basically the credits you earn during life. Have you behaved well? Have you behaved badly? And that's your karma, which is sort of piled up over the course of your life. And then that karma is what determines your reincarnation. So how well you have lived your life is going to determine how you are reborn. And if you've lived a very poor life, you're going to go down. You might be reborn as, instead of a man, a woman, or at a lower caste or something like that. However, if you've lived a good life, if you've fulfilled your duties, then you're going to be rewarded, and you may move up a level in the caste society. If you were a woman, you might be reborn as a man. Various different ways of transforming and rewarding yourself for the way that you lived your life, or punishing you for the way that you lived your life. One other thing about that, by the way, is there tends to be an implication with this, not saying that everybody believes this, but not uncommonly, this can get used as a justification for not trying to change society. So the argument is, if you are in a bad situation, if you are being abused, if you are at the very bottom of society, you are at the bottom of society because the way that you lived your last life, the karma that you earned in your previous life, that is what is responsible for the way your life is being lived now. And so that could be used at times as a way of trying to undercut revolts against the current social system. Challenges to the challenges to the old order. As the Vedic age comes to a close, it's seeing increasing amounts of sort of people who are challenging the system, challenging the authority of the Brahmins. And there's a couple of different reasons, a couple of different sources of what's going on. One of them is the new non-Brahmin authorities, the kings, the merchants, the tradesmen, who, as the wealth in the society grows, as they settle down, as they begin to build up, become closer to urban, these new non-Brahmins become more and more important, have more wealth at their disposal, have more influence, have greater importance. And so in a way, they're sort of challenging the Brahmin authority simply by the nature of what they are. So, are the Brahmins still so necessary when you have these other influential people in the society? Or should they be always taken seriously? Or should we be listening to someone else? The second set of challenges is more diffuse in the sense that there's growing numbers of people who are looking for a separate sense of spirituality. And if in the old Vedic system the idea is that the essential religious act is offering up sacrifices, and only Brahmins are allowed to offer up sacrifices, this form of personal spirituality sees this as a pursuit for the individual themselves. And they open it up beyond simply the Brahmins to a much wider range of people. And the idea is through various spiritual practices, you can achieve release. So this is sort of where yoga develops, is people going off into the woods, training, learning, trying to gain the information of various forms of spiritual disciplines to set their mind free through fasting, through prolonged meditation, in some ways through physical acts of long physical endurance, various ways that are supposedly going to open your mind up to greater knowledge. Moksha is the idea that after you've passed through these various cycles of rebirth and reincarnation, that eventually you will reach a point where you understand all. And that's when your mind will be released. Your spirit will not be reborn. It will not have to continue on into this endless cycle. And that period of release is moksha, and that's the end goal for reincarnation, to get to the point where you do not need to be reincarnated anymore. You no longer have any lessons to learn. Hinduism is the Vedic religion reborn in the 4th century CE, and really what goes on with Hinduism is it's taking the Vedic roots, the Vedic beliefs, and it's pulling into them ideas, concepts that are coming from the challenges to the Vedic system and the power of the Brahmins. So they're building both on those Vedic roots, which are still there and very present, but they're all also pulling on some of these other ideas that have been common in these other pursuits of spiritual beliefs. So in this new system, what we would call closer to modern Hinduism, Brahmin authority continues. The priests are still there. The priests are still the ones who have the power to perform the sacrifices. They are still the ones who are responsible for having knowledge of the scriptures, of the Vedas. So that concept of Brahmins as priests being the only ones who have the power to perform sacrifices, to participate in certain rites, that continues, well, pretty much through the present. And so that element does not go away. At the same time, however, there's a growing level of space for personal worship and devotion. So the public ceremonies, the public sacrifices, the public rituals may only be performed by Brahmins, but partially influenced probably by the Buddhist model, by the various yogic traditions, increasingly there's the belief that you as an individual can also engage in worship within your own home. And so people might choose to have a small shrine in their home as a place of worship, as a place of prayer, or to have a symbol with them of a god they favor. And so the idea is, in these cases, you're trying to make direct spiritual contact, despite the fact that you are not a Brahmin and not able to perform the sacrifices. Religious worship in this case, religious experience, is seen as being much broader than just simply that narrow group of people who are the priests. To encourage this, there develops a new sense of way of looking at divinity for Hinduism. And that's one that accepts that there are many different deities out there. That there's Vishnu, there's Brahma, there's Shiva, there's Devi or Kali. And there's many, 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 many more, hundreds of gods out there, all of which represent different facets of the human experience of the natural world. The belief is, though, that all of these are simply coming from the same divine force. So you may choose to make your offerings to Vishnu. You may choose to make your offerings to Kali, or Brahma, or Shiva, depending on who they are and how they relate to your particular experiences as an individual. So as a young wife, maybe you're making your offerings to the goddess Devi, who resonates with that period of your life and is someone whom you might see as having a special care for and a special interest in you and women like you. However, even though that is who you may be making offerings to, your offerings are still being paid ultimately. Your worship is still being paid ultimately to that same ultimate divine force. It's simply a divine force that wears many different phases as a way of making itself accessible to all the different people and their different needs and places. Even more than worship, though, the critical thing in Hinduism is dharma, your duty. And your duty is to be set, at least in theory, by your stage of life. Are you young? Are you old? Are you middle years? Where are you in the various stages of your life? Your varna. Are you from the merchant class? Are you from the priest class? Are you from the warrior class? Are you Shudra? Are you simply a worker? Are you untouchable? Where do you fit into that system of varna and jati? And then finally in gender, are you male? Are you female? The idea is that all of those things together assign a certain duty for a certain stage of your life. And your job is to do that duty. And that means that for you to do your duty means that you may not be doing things that would be valuable for other people. It may be valuable for Brahmins to study the Vedas and spend all their time on that. However, if you are a Shudra, someone who is meant to be a worker, someone who is working with their hands, it's far more important that you be able to do that work than it is to be reading the Vedas, because reading the Vedas is a Brahmin's duty, a Brahmin's dharma. You have your own dharma to fulfill. And quite possibly, if you do your dharma well in this life, in another life, you will be the person reading the Vedas. And so you'll have learned this lesson you have right now, and you'll have moved on to another one. As the Bhagavad Gita says, your own duty done imperfectly is better than another man's done well. It is better to die in one's duty. Another man's duty is perilous. And so basically the concept is that you need to do what you are expected to do. And that's your goal. That's your role in the place, your role in the human pageant. And maybe after you die and you're reborn, depending on your karma, you will have a different dharma to do. And then your job will be to fulfill that dharma and fulfill it well. So your karma is based on your fulfillment of the dharma. So you do your duty. How well you do your duty determines your karma. And this is very similar to the Vedic concept, so it's going to sound overwhelmingly familiar. And then that, of course, dictates your reincarnation. By this point, moksha, liberation, has been accepted as a basic goal for Hinduism. It's sort of been adopted in from some of the yogic trains of thoughts and things like that. But it's, once again, a dharma that only certain people have the time, the stage of life to pursue. So pursuing moksha, trying to pursue liberation, complete detachment from the world, that's a job for an elderly priest. It is an elderly Brahmin. It would not be appropriate, for example, for that Brahmin's wife, who has duties towards helping to run the household, or for a Shudra, or for a merchant, or for any of those other groups to pursue that in the same way it is a duty for the Brahmin. So ultimately, for critical concepts in terms of Hinduism, you have the concept of varna and jati and dharma, the idea that each person is assigned a certain role in life that they have to perform, and they have to perform it well. And how well they perform that life determines basically how they'll be rewarded, what their karma will be. So you have a varna, which determines your dharma, and how well you perform your dharma will lead to your karma and determine your karma. However, the assumption is that because of reincarnation after you die, you will go to a different dharma. So what you need in this life, what dharma you have to do in this life, what job you have to learn, what duty you have to fulfill, if you do it well in this life, then in the next life you will be given a different one. And so in that sense, the idea is that reincarnation is what's going to liberate you and free you to moving on to the next step of your further and greater development, rather than seeking change in your current life.